I was tricked into dating a half-paralyzed boy. He said, "You don't have to stay if it's pity." But he never imagined I'd stay because I fell in love with the strongest man I'd ever met. The notification sound from Maya's phone cut through the quiet hum of the university library. She glanced around guiltily, ensuring the librarian hadn't noticed, before sliding her finger across the screen. Another message from David. Question: if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be, and why? And please don't say Einstein. Everyone says Einstein. Maya suppressed a smile as she tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. For 3 weeks now, David had been the highlight of her day. Their conversations flowed effortlessly from philosophy to terrible movie recommendations, from childhood memories to dreams about the future. Unlike other guys she'd met on dating apps, David never seemed in a rush to meet up or push boundaries. He was content to build something real through words first. She typed back, "Frederick Douglass. I want to understand how someone finds the strength to not just survive injustice, but to transform it into something that changes the world. Your turn. And don't you dare say someone obvious." The response came quickly. Mary Shelley. At 18, she basically invented science fiction while hanging out with the world's most famous poets. Plus, she had to deal with people claiming her boyfriend wrote Frankenstein. I'd want to know what she really thought about all the credit-stealing men in her life. Maya's smile widened. This was exactly why she looked forward to his messages. David saw angles others missed, asked questions that made her think differently. Her roommate Jessica constantly teased her about being addicted to Phone Boy, but Maya didn't care. In a world of superficial swipes and shallow conversations, David felt like finding water in a desert. The autumn afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Perry Castaneda Library as Maya gathered her physical therapy textbooks. She was in her final year at UT Austin, and between clinic rotations and studying for boards, her social life had basically become non-existent. Meeting David had been an accident. She downloaded the app during a particularly lonely night after watching her friends couple up one by one. Her phone buzzed again. "So I have to ask something, and feel free to say no. I know we've been talking for a while now, and I really enjoy our conversations. Would you maybe want to meet up for coffee this weekend? There's this place called Radio Coffee that has amazing pastries and terrible acoustic guitar performances on Saturday afternoons." Maya's heart skipped. She'd been hoping he'd ask, but also dreading it somehow. What if the magic they'd built through text messages didn't translate to real life? What if he was disappointed when he saw her? What if she was disappointed when she saw him? "I'd love to," she typed before she could overthink it. "Saturday around 2? Perfect. I'll be the one probably overthinking everything and checking my phone too much. Fair warning, I'm nervous about this." His honesty made her chest warm. "Me too. But good nervous, you know? The best kind of nervous." That evening, Maya sat cross-legged on her dorm room bed, video calling her best friend from high school, Carmen, who was now working as a nurse in Houston. "So, let me get this straight," Carmen said, her face pixelated on the screen as she multitasked making dinner. "You've been texting this guy for almost a month and you're just now meeting? Maya, what if he's catfishing you?" "He's not catfishing me," Maya protested, though she realized she'd only seen a few photos, and they were mostly artistic shots or group pictures where his face wasn't completely clear. "We video called once, remember? For like 5 minutes, and you said the connection was terrible." Maya sighed. Carmen meant well, but she had a tendency to assume the worst about online dating. "I trust him, Carmen. I know that sounds naive, but our conversations, they're real. He tells me about his bad days, about struggling with law school applications, about feeling lost sometimes. That's not catfish behavior. If you say so, just promise me you'll meet somewhere public and tell someone where you're going." "Obviously," Maya said, rolling her eyes. "Jessica will know where I am." After they hung up, Maya stared at her reflection in the mirror above her dresser. At 5'4", with warm brown eyes and naturally wavy hair that had a mind of its own, she'd never considered herself particularly striking. But David had told her she had a beautiful smile in their brief video call, and something about the way he'd said it made her believe him. She pulled out her laptop and scrolled through David's dating profile one more time. David Chen, 23, law school applicant, loved hiking and photography. His bio mentioned growing up in San Antonio, studying political science at UT, and having strong opinions about the best breakfast tacos in Austin. The photos showed a lean, athletic-looking guy with kind eyes and an easy smile. In one picture, he was holding a camera at some scenic overlook. In another, he was laughing with friends at what looked like a graduation party. Maya closed the laptop, feeling that familiar flutter of anticipation mixed with anxiety. In 2 days, she'd finally meet the person who had somehow become such an important part of her daily routine. The person who remembered that she had a big exam on Tuesday and texted her good luck, who sent her funny articles about physical therapy innovations and asked thoughtful questions about her career goals. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Saturday would change everything. She just didn't know how. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Austin feel magical. Maya had changed outfits 3 times before settling on dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft burgundy sweater that Carmen had given her for her birthday. She'd arrived at Radio Coffee 10 minutes early, partly from nervousness and partly because she wanted to scope out the scene first. The coffee shop buzzed with typical weekend energy. Students hunched over laptops, families with young children sharing pastries, and a group of older men engaged in what appeared to be a heated chess match. Maya ordered a lavender latte and found a small table near the window where she could watch for David's arrival. Her phone showed 2:03 p.m. She tried to calm her nerves by people watching and reviewing their text conversation from that morning. David had seemed as nervous as she was, joking about bringing flashcards with conversation topics in case they ran out of things to say. The thought made her smile. At 2:07, she saw a guy who might be David walking up to the entrance. Her heart rate quickened, but as he got closer, she realized it wasn't him. She checked her phone again. No messages. It was 2:15 when she finally spotted David through the window. Her breath caught in her throat, but not for the reason she'd expected. The person approaching the coffee shop entrance was definitely David. She recognized his face from their video call and photos, but he was using a wheelchair. Maya's mind raced as she watched him navigate through the door, which another customer held open for him. This was David. The same David who had talked about hiking trails around Austin, who had mentioned playing intramural soccer in college, who had never once mentioned being disabled in any of their extensive conversations. She felt a complex mix of emotions crash over her: confusion, disappointment, and something that might have been anger. Not anger about the disability itself, but about the omission, the deliberate choice to not mention something so significant. David spotted her almost immediately, probably because she was the only person sitting alone and staring directly at him. Their eyes met, and she saw something she'd never heard in his voice during their calls: defensiveness mixed with resignation. He wheeled over to her table, and Maya stood awkwardly, unsure of the greeting protocol. Should she hug him? Shake hands? The moment stretched uncomfortably. "Hi, Maya," David said, his voice quieter than she'd expected. "So now you know." "Know what?" she asked, though they both knew exactly what he meant. David positioned his wheelchair at the table and looked directly at her. His eyes were just as kind as they'd appeared in photos, but there was something guarded there now. "That I didn't tell you the whole truth about myself." Maya sat back down, her mind still trying to process. "You said you loved hiking. You talked about playing soccer." "I did love hiking. I did play soccer." Past tense. His voice was matter of fact, but she caught the slight tension in his jaw. "Look, I know this is probably not what you were expecting. If you want to leave, I understand. I can just get a coffee and go." The offer somehow made her angry. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Give me an easy out before we even have a conversation." Maya folded her hands on the table, trying to organize her thoughts. "I'm not going to lie. I'm confused right now. And yeah, I feel a little misled, but I'm not running away." Something in David's expression shifted slightly. Most people do. Most people what? Run away. Or stick around out of pity, which is somehow worse. He ran a hand through his dark hair, and Maya noticed his hands were strong, with long fingers. "Look, Maya, I should have told you. I know that. But I wanted you to know me first before you knew this." He gestured vaguely at his wheelchair. "I wanted you to know that I'm funny and smart and that I read too many books about constitutional law for my own good. I wanted you to know David before you knew disabled David." Maya studied his face as he spoke. This was still the same person who had made her laugh until she cried reading his commentary about reality TV shows. The same person who had listened when she'd called him, stressed about her practicum evaluations. But it was also someone who had deliberately hidden a fundamental part of his daily reality. "When did it happen?" she asked quietly. "Car accident 2 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light." David's tone was clinical, like he'd told this story many times before. "T12 complete spinal cord injury, which means I have no feeling or movement below my waist. I was in the hospital for 3 months, rehab for another 2. "I'm sorry," Maya said, and immediately felt stupid for the inadequacy of the words. "Don't be sorry," David said, not unkindly. "I've had time to adjust. Mostly. It's not the pity I have trouble with. It's the assumption that this is the most interesting thing about me. Maya took a sip of her latte, buying herself time to think. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but she barely noticed. Is that why you didn't tell me? Because you thought I'd only see the wheelchair? Partly. David hesitated, then continued. But also because dating is complicated enough without having to explain accessibility requirements and medical equipment and whether someone is interested in you or their idea of being a good person by dating someone disabled. The honesty in his voice cut through Maya's confusion. She could hear years of disappointment and frustration layered beneath his words. That's really cynical. Maybe. But it's based on experience. They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the coffee shop swirling around them. Maya watched David's hands as he fidgeted with a sugar packet, trying to reconcile the David she'd built in her mind with the David sitting across from her. They were the same person, she realized, but her perspective had shifted in a way that felt disorienting. So where does this leave us? David asked finally. And please be honest. I'd rather know now if this is too complicated for you. Maya met his eyes directly. I don't know, she said truthfully. I need to process this. Not because of the wheelchair, but because of the lying by omission. That part bothers me. David nodded slowly. Fair enough. But I also understand why you did it, Maya continued. I think it doesn't make it right, but I get it. So what do we do now? Maya surprised herself by reaching across the table and touching his hand briefly. Now we order you a coffee and have the conversation we came here to have. And we figure out if what we built over text messages is real enough to survive some complicated honesty. For the first time since he'd arrived, David smiled. It was tentative, but genuine. I'd like that. As Maya walked up to the counter to order David's coffee, medium roast, no sugar, splash of oat milk, exactly how he'd described his preference in one of their morning conversations, she realized that everything had changed in the span of 20 minutes. But maybe, if they were both brave enough to be completely honest from this point forward, it could change into something real. 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon at Radio Coffee, and Maya found herself in uncharted territory. She and David had been seeing each other regularly. Study sessions at the library, lunch between her classes, long walks around campus where she learned to adjust her pace to match his wheelchair's rhythm. What surprised her most was how quickly the wheelchair had become simply part of David, rather than the defining feature she'd initially fixated on. But if Maya was adjusting, the people around her were struggling to understand. I just don't get it, Jessica said for what felt like the 100th time, sprawled across Maya's bed while Maya tried to focus on her anatomy textbook. Not the wheelchair thing. I mean, whatever, that's not the issue. It's that he lied to you for weeks. How do you trust someone after that? Maya looked up from her textbook, irritated. He didn't lie, exactly. He just didn't mention it. Maya, come on. That's like me not mentioning I have a twin sister for 3 months. It's a pretty significant omission. It's not the same thing, Maya said, but even as she spoke, she felt the familiar knot of uncertainty in her stomach. The same doubt that crept in during quiet moments when she wondered if she was being naive. Jessica sat up, her expression softening. Look, I like David. He's clearly smart, he makes you laugh, and he brings you those little pastries you love. But I'm your friend, and I've watched you overthink every relationship decision since sophomore year. I just want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. What's that supposed to mean? Are you with him because you genuinely like him? Or because you feel like you're proving something? About being open-minded or whatever? The question hit Maya like a physical blow. That's a terrible thing to ask. Is it? Because you've been different since you started dating him. More defensive. You never used to get this worked up when I asked questions about guys you were seeing. Maya closed her textbook with more force than necessary. Maybe because those guys weren't worth defending. Before Jessica could respond, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David. Study break? There's a food truck festival in Zilker Park, and I have it on good authority that there's a grilled cheese vendor that will change your life. Maya smiled despite her frustration. Give me 20 minutes? Take your time. I'll be the guy in the blue sweater reading a very dense book about constitutional interpretation and probably confusing children. As Maya gathered her things, Jessica watched her with a concerned expression. Maya, I'm not trying to be mean. I know, Maya said, softening. But I need to figure this out myself, okay? The October afternoon was perfect for a festival. Sunny, but not too warm, with the kind of light that made everything look Instagram-worthy. Maya found David exactly where he'd said he'd be, parked near a picnic table under a massive oak tree, absorbed in what looked like the world's most boring textbook. Please tell me that's not light reading, Maya said, sliding onto the bench across from him. David looked up, his face brightening. This is my idea of a page-turner. Constitutional interpretation and the role of federal courts in modern democracy. Absolute thriller. You're such a nerd, Maya said, but she was smiling. This was the David she'd fallen for through text messages, the one who could make her laugh while discussing the most mundane topics. They spent the next hour wandering through the festival, sampling everything from Korean BBQ tacos to artisanal ice cream sandwiches. Maya noticed how David navigated the crowds, how he'd learned to position his wheelchair to avoid blocking foot traffic, how vendors would sometimes lean down to talk to him and he'd handle it with patient grace. "Can I ask you something?" Maya said as they shared a funnel cake that was probably violating several health codes but tasted incredible. "Shoot. Do you ever get tired of being gracious about people's reactions?" David paused, considering. "You mean when people talk to me like I'm 12, or when they ask you instead of me what I want to order?" "Yeah, that stuff. Every day," he said honestly. "But what's the alternative? Being angry all the time? That just makes everyone uncomfortable, including me." Maya nodded, but something in his tone made her push further. "But don't you think people should be uncomfortable sometimes? If they're acting badly?" David studied her face. "Why are you asking?" Maya hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Jessica thinks I'm dating you to prove I'm not shallow. My mom asked if I was sure I was ready for that kind of responsibility. Carmen keeps sending me articles about being a caregiver in relationships. Everyone has opinions, and I'm getting tired of defending us." David set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. "So we've reached the part where reality hits." "What do you mean?" "I mean, this is usually when people realize that dating someone disabled means dealing with other people's assumptions and judgments, not just your own." His voice was calm, but Maya caught the underlying tension. "Some people can handle it, some can't." "I can handle it," Maya said quickly. "Can you?" "Because it doesn't get easier. People are going to assume you're my caretaker. They're going to think you're either a saint or settling. Your family is going to worry about your future. Friends are going to question your judgment." David's voice remained steady, but his hands were clenched. "I've been through this before, Maya. I know how it goes." Maya felt a flash of irritation. "So you think I'm going to bail? Just like that? I think you're 22 and you shouldn't have to deal with this if you don't want to. Don't I get a say in what I can handle?" "Of course you do. But I also need you to be realistic about what you're signing up for." They sat in silence for a moment, the festival continuing around them. Maya watched a family with young children navigate between vendors, the parents casually steering their kids away from David's wheelchair without seeming to think about it. She wondered if David noticed, if he always noticed. "What happened with the others?" Maya asked quietly. "The people who couldn't handle it?" David was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "The last girl I dated seriously was named Rachel. We met in a political science class, started dating about 6 months after my accident. She was great at first, patient, understanding, never made a big deal about accessibility stuff. What happened? Her parents happened. Her friends happened. She got tired of defending me, tired of people assuming she was my nurse, tired of having to think about whether restaurants had step-free entrances." David's voice was matter of fact, but Maya could hear the hurt underneath. "She said she loved me, but she couldn't love my life." Maya felt her chest tighten. "I'm not Rachel." "No, you're not. But you're also dealing with the same pressures she was." Maya reached across the table and took his hand. "David, look at me." He met her eyes reluctantly. "I'm not going anywhere because Jessica thinks you lied to me. I'm not going anywhere because my mom is worried about logistics she doesn't understand. I'm here because 3 weeks ago you made me laugh so hard I snorted coffee out of my nose when you told me about your professor's terrible toupee. I'm here because you remember that I hate cilantro and you always know exactly what to say when I'm stressed about exams." David's expression softened slightly. "But," Maya continued, "I need you to stop assuming I'm going to leave. It's insulting, and it's not fair to either of us." David nodded slowly. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's hard to trust that this won't follow the same pattern." "Then let's make a different pattern," Maya said. "Let's be honest about the hard stuff, but let's also give this a real chance. Deal?" David smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all afternoon. "Deal." As they walked back toward campus, Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "How's the festival? Still mad at me for asking hard questions?" Maya looked at David, who was telling her about his law school interview next week, his face animated with excitement and nervousness. Then she texted back, Not mad. Thanks for making me think. But I'm good. We're good. She meant it. The questions weren't going to stop and the assumptions would probably continue. But Maya was beginning to understand that the real challenge wasn't other people's opinions. It was learning to trust herself and learning to trust David to be honest about his own needs and boundaries. It was more complicated than she'd expected, but it was also more real than anything she'd experienced before. The law school interview had gone well. Better than well, actually. David had texted Maya from outside the admissions building at UT with barely contained excitement. They asked about my community advocacy work and actually seemed impressed instead of surprised. I think this might actually happen. Maya had been thrilled for him. But as November settled over Austin with its unpredictable weather swings, she was beginning to understand what David meant about the complexities of their relationship extending beyond just the two of them. It started with small things. Her physical therapy professor, Dr. Martinez, had made an offhand comment about Maya's obvious interest in spinal cord injury rehabilitation when she'd asked detailed questions about adaptive equipment during a lecture. Maya had felt her face burn with embarrassment, knowing her classmates were probably making assumptions about her motivations. Then there was the incident at her part-time job at the campus recreation center. Maya worked the front desk 3 afternoons a week, checking in students and handling equipment rentals. David had stopped by one Tuesday to walk her home after her shift, and Maya had watched her supervisor, Karen, interact with him. "Oh, how nice that you're here to pick up Maya," Karen had said, speaking slowly and loudly as if David were hard of hearing instead of paralyzed. "She's such a sweet girl, always talking about her volunteer work. I'm actually her boyfriend," David had said politely, "and my hearing is fine." Karen had flushed red and quickly busied herself with paperwork, but the damage was done. Maya had felt mortified on David's behalf and frustrated that he'd had to advocate for basic respect in such a simple interaction. The breaking point came during Maya's family visit home to San Antonio for Thanksgiving weekend. She'd been nervous about introducing David to her parents, but she'd hoped that their natural warmth would override any initial discomfort. She'd been partially right. "He seems lovely, mija," her mother, Elena, had said as they prepared dinner together Friday evening. David was in the living room with Maya's father and younger brother, discussing something that sounded like a heated but friendly debate about college football. Very smart, very polite. But? Maya could hear the unspoken reservation in her mother's voice. Elena sighed, setting down the wooden spoon she'd been using to stir beans. "But have you thought about what this means for your future? For your career? You're going to be a physical therapist. You'll be on your feet all day, dealing with physical demands. When you come home, don't you want to be able to relax?" "Mom, David doesn't need me to take care of him. He's completely independent." "Now he is, mija. But what about later? What about when you want to have children? What about when he gets older and maybe needs more help?" Maya felt her chest tighten with frustration. What about when any partner gets older and needs more help? What about when any couple faces challenges? "It's different, Maya, and you know it. Because he uses a wheelchair? Because..." Elena struggled to find the right words. "Because you're choosing additional challenges that you don't have to choose. There are so many other wonderful men out there who what? Don't have disabilities?" Maya's voice was sharper than she intended. "Mom, I'm not dating David because I feel sorry for him or because I want to be some kind of saint. I'm dating him because he makes me laugh and challenges me to think differently and remembers that I like my coffee with cinnamon." Elena reached over and touched Maya's arm gently. "I know you care about him, sweetheart. I can see that. But I also see how you tense up every time someone mentions his wheelchair. You're working so hard to prove that it doesn't matter, that you're not being honest about how much it does matter." "That's not..." Maya started, then stopped. Was her mother right? Was she overcompensating somehow? That evening, after David had returned to his hotel, Maya's parents had offered him the guest room, but he'd politely declined, saying he preferred the independence of his own space. Maya found herself sitting on her childhood bedroom floor, staring at old photos from high school. Her phone rang. "David." "Hey," she answered, grateful for his voice. "Hey yourself. Your family seems great. Your dad knows way too much about constitutional law for someone who sells insurance." Maya smiled despite her churning thoughts. "He reads a lot. Did you have fun?" "I did. Though I think your mom is still deciding whether she likes me." Maya's silence stretched long enough that David picked up on it. "Maya? What's wrong?" She took a deep breath. "She thinks I'm dating you to prove a point. She thinks I'm not being realistic about what the future looks like." "Ah." David was quiet for a moment. "What do you think?" "I think..." Maya struggled to find the right words. "I think I hate that she might be a little bit right." "About which part?" About me working so hard to prove the wheelchair doesn't matter. Because it does matter, doesn't it? Not in a bad way necessarily, but it's part of our reality. And I feel like if I acknowledge that, I'm somehow being shallow or discriminatory. David was quiet for so long that Maya wondered if the call had dropped. David? I'm here. I'm just thinking. He paused. You're right. It does matter. Of course it matters. I use a wheelchair, which means we have to think about things other couples don't. Restaurant accessibility, travel logistics, the fact that I can't give you a piggyback ride when you're tired. Despite everything, Maya found herself smiling at the last part. But, David continued, it mattering doesn't mean it's a problem to solve or an obstacle to overcome. It's just part of who I am, part of who we are if we're going to be an us. I'm scared, Maya admitted quietly. Not of your wheelchair, but of getting this wrong. Of being the girlfriend who's trying too hard to be understanding, or not understanding enough, or making this about me when it's about you. Maya, listen to me. There's no perfect way to do this. I'm still figuring it out too. But the fact that you're thinking about these things, that you're willing to have uncomfortable conversations, that matters more than getting everything right immediately. Maya wiped her eyes, not realizing she'd started crying. Your ex-girlfriend, Rachel, was she trying to get it right too? Yeah, she was, for a while. But eventually, the pressure of everyone else's opinions became more important to her than what we actually had together. David's voice was gentle but clear. That's what I'm afraid of with you. Not that you can't handle my disability, but that you'll let other people's fears become your fears. Maya curled up on her bed, holding the phone close to her ear. What if I do? What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll deal with it when it happens. But I'd rather take that risk with you than spend my time protecting myself from possibilities. They talked for another hour, until Maya's exhaustion overtook her anxiety. When they finally hung up, she felt emotionally wrung out but somehow clearer. Her mother's concerns weren't entirely wrong, but they also weren't insurmountable. The question wasn't whether dating David would present challenges. It was whether those challenges were worth navigating together. The next morning over breakfast, Elena studied her daughter's face carefully. You look like you didn't sleep much. I was thinking about what you said yesterday. Elena set down her coffee cup. And I think you're right about some things. This isn't the same as dating someone without a disability. There are practical considerations I wouldn't normally have to think about. Maya paused, choosing her words carefully. But Mom, I've never felt this comfortable with someone. I've never had someone listen to me the way David does, or make me feel like my thoughts and opinions actually matter. Those are important things, Mija. They are. And I think I'd rather figure out accessibility logistics with someone who treats me like an equal partner than have an easy relationship with someone who doesn't. Elena reached across the table and squeezed Maya's hand. If that's what you think is best, then I trust your judgment. Just promise me you'll keep being honest with yourself about what you want and need. Don't lose yourself trying to be the perfect girlfriend. Maya nodded, feeling something settle in her chest. The conversation wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning. And maybe that was enough for now. When she returned to Austin that Sunday evening, David was waiting for her in the parking lot of her dorm. He'd brought her favorite lavender tea from the coffee shop they'd first met at, and he didn't ask about her family conversations. Instead, he told her about the book he'd been reading and asked about her thoughts on their upcoming final exams. It was ordinary and comfortable and exactly what she needed. Maya realized that this, the ease of being with someone who knew her well enough to give her space to process while still showing up when she needed him, was what she was choosing to fight for. Spring semester brought changes that Maya hadn't anticipated. David had been accepted to UT Law with a partial scholarship, validating months of hard work and uncertainty. Maya was deep into her final clinical rotations, spending long days at Dell Children's Medical Center learning hands-on rehabilitation techniques. Their schedules barely aligned anymore, stolen moments between classes and study sessions becoming precious commodities. But it was during one of these clinical rotations that Maya encountered something that would shift her perspective entirely. She was working with Dr. Sarah Kim, a pediatric physical therapist, when they were assigned a new patient, Marcus, a 7-year-old who had been paralyzed in a swimming accident 3 months earlier. His parents, Jennifer and Robert, were exactly Maya's age, young professionals whose world had been turned upside down in an instant. The hardest part, Jennifer confided to Maya during one of Marcus's sessions, isn't the medical stuff. We can learn about equipment and medications and therapy schedules. It's that everyone looks at us like we're saints or heroes for just being his parents. Like loving our son is somehow extraordinary now. Maya felt something click into place as she watched Marcus work through his exercises, his determination and humor intact despite everything he'd been through. This was what David had been trying to explain to her for months, that treating someone's disability as either inspirational or tragic missed the fundamental point. Marcus was still Marcus, funny and stubborn and obsessed with dinosaurs. Jennifer and Robert were still his parents, navigating challenges like any family, just with different logistics. That evening, Maya found David in the law library, surrounded by case files and constitutional law textbooks. She slid into the chair across from him, and he looked up with tired but welcoming eyes. "How was clinic today?" "Eye-opening," Maya said, then told him about Marcus and his family. David listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking I've been doing this all wrong," Maya said quietly. "Not us, necessarily, but my whole approach to understanding your disability." "How so?" Maya gathered her thoughts. "I've been so focused on proving that your wheelchair doesn't matter that I've been missing the point entirely. It's not about whether it matters or not. It's about integrating it into our reality without making it the defining characteristic of our relationship." David's expression was carefully neutral. "And what does that look like to you?" "It looks like me learning about spinal cord injury because I'm going to be a physical therapist and you're important to me, not because I think I need to fix or understand every aspect of your medical situation." Maya paused, organizing her thoughts. "It looks like us planning trips based on what we both want to do, while also considering accessibility. It looks like me getting angry when people treat you like a child, not because I'm defending my boyfriend's honor, but because you're a person who deserves basic respect." David was quiet for a long moment. "Maya, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "The reason I didn't mention my disability in my dating profile wasn't just because I was afraid of being reduced to it. It was also because I was afraid that mentioning it would attract people who saw dating someone disabled as a good deed or an adventure." Maya felt her stomach drop. "Do you think that's what I was doing?" "No," David said firmly. "But I think you've been so concerned about proving you're not that person that you've been exhausting yourself trying to be perfect at something there's no perfect way to be." Maya laughed, surprising herself. "So we're both overthinking this." Catastrophically. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of months of careful navigation settling between them. "David?" "Yeah? I love you." It was the first time either of them had said it. The words hung in the air of the quiet library, honest and unadorned. David's face transformed, tension she hadn't realized he'd been carrying dissolving into something soft and relieved. "I love you too. Not because you use a wheelchair, not despite it, just because you're you." "Same," David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Because you argue with me about constitutional interpretation even though you think it's boring. Because you bring me coffee exactly how I like it without making a big deal about it. Because you're going to be an amazing physical therapist who actually listens to her patients." Maya felt tears prick her eyes. "We really overcomplicated this, didn't we?" "We did, but I think we needed to." 6 months later, Maya stood at her graduation ceremony, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Her parents had driven up from San Antonio, Jessica was somewhere in the sea of purple graduation gowns, and Carmen had flown in from Houston. But her eyes found David first, positioned near the accessible seating area with the biggest smile she'd ever seen him wear. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, Maya introduced David to her extended relatives without preamble or explanation. Her tia Rosa immediately engaged him in animated conversation about law school. Her cousin Miguel asked about his opinion on recent Supreme Court decisions, and her grandmother insisted on giving him her recipe for the best breakfast tacos in Texas. "You didn't tell them about me?" David asked later as they walked toward the restaurant where both their families were meeting for dinner. "I told them you were my boyfriend who was starting law school and that they'd like you," Maya said. "Was there something else they needed to know?" David grinned. "Nope, that about covers it." At dinner, Maya watched as their families mingled naturally. David and her father discussed legal precedents, while her mother and David's parents compared stories about raising stubborn, intellectually curious children. Jessica entertained David's sister with college horror stories, and Carmen peppered David with questions about law school applications since her boyfriend was considering applying. It wasn't perfect. Maya's uncle made an awkward comment about young people these days being so accepting, and David's father got a little too enthusiastic about explaining adaptive sports to anyone who would listen. But it was real and messy and fundamentally okay. Later that night, as Maya and David sat on the porch of his apartment sharing leftover graduation cake, Maya reflected on how far they'd come from that nervous coffee shop meeting 8 months earlier. So what happens now? David asked, echoing the question he'd posed that first afternoon when Maya had discovered his omission about his wheelchair. Now we figure out how to be adults together, Maya said. You start law school, I start my first job at the rehab center, and we learn how to navigate real life. That's it? Maya considered this. That's it. No more proving anything to anyone. No more walking on eggshells about whether I'm handling your disability correctly or whether you're being too protective of yourself. Just us figuring out how to build a life together. Just us figuring out how to build a life together. David leaned over and kissed her, tasting like vanilla frosting and contentment. When they broke apart, Maya realized that somewhere along the way, she'd stopped seeing David's wheelchair as either an obstacle to overcome or an inspiration to celebrate. It had simply become part of their shared landscape, as integral and unremarkable as his terrible jokes or her tendency to reorganize his bookshelf when she was stressed. I have one more confession, David said as they prepared to go inside. Maya raised an eyebrow. Please tell me you're not secretly married or something. Nothing that dramatic. I just wanted you to know that you're the first person I've dated who's made me feel like my disability is just one part of who I am, instead of the most important thing about me. Good, Maya said, taking his hand. Because you're the first person I've dated who makes me feel like I can be completely myself. Overthinking, cilantro-hating, constitutional law-arguing self, and that's exactly who you want to be with. As they made their way inside, Maya caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. A young woman and a young man, one standing and one seated, both laughing at something David had said. They looked like exactly what they were. Two people who had found each other, navigated some complicated terrain together, and emerged with something real and sustainable. It hadn't been the fairy tale romance Maya had imagined when she'd first downloaded that dating app. It had been better, messier and more challenging, but also more honest and ultimately more satisfying. They'd learned that love wasn't about overcoming differences or pretending they didn't exist. It was about integrating those differences into a shared life that made space for both of their complete, complicated selves. Maya squeezed David's hand as they settled on his couch, her head on his shoulder while he read case studies for his summer internship. This was their truth, ordinary and extraordinary, simple and complex, built on a foundation of genuine affection and hard-won understanding. It was exactly what she'd been looking for, even if it hadn't looked like what she'd expected.